Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Christen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey y'all, welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Christen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so happy that you are listening today. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. Hey, if this is your first time listening, I hope you really enjoy this and you keep coming back for more. Don't forget to listen to the end of every episode. That's where we have the kids only segment where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Also, I want to say to always be sure to share these episodes if you enjoy them. If there's something that really sticks out to you or there's something that you really liked in a conversation we had, share it with a friend. That's always a great way to get word out about the podcast. And I love hearing about how much you guys are enjoying the show. Well, I hope you guys are having an amazing summer. I know I am so far, and I'm really excited about today's guest. So let's jump right in. Our guest today is Hunter Williams. He serves as a missionary with Awana and sees himself as a child discipleship advocate. His calling is to elevate the view of children and the high quality of discipleship they receive in the church and in the home. He loves connecting with people, trying new things, reading, and going on adventures with his family. You guys are really going to enjoy this conversation with my friend Hunter Williams. Hunter, I am so glad to have you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hope so. That's what everyone says, but you never know. It could take a turn. We'll try to make it fun.
Oh, we will.
Yeah. Well, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love sharing my story, not because it's about me, but there's some really interesting pieces to my story that when I tell them every time, I'm just like, that's a total God thing. There's no way this should have happened in my story unless God was in it. And so,
yeah.
What's funny is people ask me to share my story, and I always start back when I'm a kid, and they're like, "Oh, we didn't mean that far back," but it does make
beginning.
Yeah, I was born on, but I like to start early because it actually makes sense of what I do now. And so, growing up, I wasn't in a Christian home the first 7-8 years of my life. My dad was actually a country singer, and like I was telling you before we got on air, he was rising in his country music career. I think he was on track to sign with one of the biggest record labels at the time. But the problem was he was an alcoholic. So he would drink a little too much after shows. And there was one show in particular, he got alcohol poisoning. His heart it almost burst. It swelled so much.
Wow.
And so he's in the hospital. He thinks he's on what is his deathbed. And so he's crying out to God in his mind, saying, "God, save my life." And he said, I will live for you. I give my life to you. I don't want my sons to grow up without a father. I want to do what's right. And he ended up making it through. God saved his life physically, spiritually. And so when he came out of the hospital, he said, "We're going to start going to church." And that was so weird for us because we'd never done that before. And I can remember when we were trying out different churches, one church stood out to me because they had something for kids and it was engaging. They shared the Bible in a way that made sense to me. And I told my parents, we got to keep coming back here because they love me and I love being here. And I didn't know it at the time, but the ministry that church had was Awana. And that will come into play here in a second. Okay. And so I came to Christ through Awana when I was, which if your listeners don't know, Awana is like a national, or actually it's an international children's ministry, reaches almost 5 million kids all over the world. And so I was at an Awana club in Little Red Bank, Tennessee, and came to Christ. And my spiritual growth took off from there. And what's so beautiful is as I grew, my parents saw this, they came to Christ and they grew as well. And so now my dad that used to be a country singer is a pastor. And it's just been so cool to see how God has changed our lives because of someone taking the time to share the gospel with me.
Wow.
And the reason I say, that's so important to my story is because I serve with Awana now. I'm on staff with Awana as a missionary here in Tennessee, and it's so cool to think that part of my role as a missionary is I get to see more stories like mine unfold, where I get to see kids who were far from God come to know, love, and serve Him. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I do what I do. I want to see more stories like mine replicated throughout my state and throughout the country, throughout the world. Where through, whether it's Awana clubs, whether it's through other things that Awana does, they come to know Jesus. So yeah, so it's fun to share my story because it's amazing what God can do just through the small moments in your life to make huge impact.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's so good. And so what do you do with Awana?
Yeah, so missionary, some people are like, what does an Awana missionary do? And we wear a lot of hats, but kind of the way I summarize what I do for a lot of people is I say, now this is a mouthful, I'm a child discipleship advocate. And I choose all those words intentionally because I'm an advocate for children. I want to see their lives changed. But I'm an advocate for their discipleship, which means what shapes them, what helps them grow, what develops who they are as a person. And so whether I'm talking with leaders at a church or whether I'm talking with parents at a home, I'm advocating that children have quality discipleship happening. And so, that might mean I'm doing a training at a church. It might mean I'm speaking at a children's ministry event, or it might mean I'm just connecting with parents or pastors to say, what can we do to better equip the church or parents to reach kids with the gospel and do it well. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I'm about.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, I'm excited to talk about all of this with you. But before we do that, because this is a podcast for kids, we always like to start out with a joke or a funny impression. So I hear you have both. So let's hear your joke
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, so the joke I picked, it's one I actually told a bunch when I was a kid. So I was
Okay.
really into playing Nintendo, playing Mario Kart, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I got a Mario joke for you. I
Okay.
always thought this one was amazing when I was a kid. So, what type of pants do Mario and Luigi wear? Let me ask that again. What type of pants do Mario and Luigi wear?
I don't know.
Denim, denim, denim. Denim, denim, denim.
I love that.
Boom.
That was awesome. You
Yeah.
got all the gamers just perked up a little bit. They're like, "Oh wait, I know that
Yeah.
sound."
The only bummer with that is if you're not a gamer, you're like, what's he doing? But if you
Yes.
played the classic Mario or any of them, you recognize the tune. But
Yes. That needs to be like a ringtone or something for your phone. I'm sure somebody's made that already, but I love that. Get your attention. Okay, that's awesome. That was a good one. What about your impressions?
yeah, so I don't know if I would call them impressions.
Oh,
They're
okay.
just random noises and voices I've done. So when I was a kid, I was constantly just telling stories, doing whatever I could to make my friends laugh. And so, I'd be in the back of class and I'd be like, did anyone see that chicken? And I go, and
Wow.
so, and then I'd be like at recess and go, did someone lose a dog? And I go, and then I was doing all kinds of stuff like that. And then I would mimic musical instruments. So we'd be in music class and I'd be in the room going,
Nice.
like all this stuff. And I was such a like outgoing kid and always, manipulating my voice, doing noises, make people laugh. And I always had like stories going on in my head. So like if I was at home, I'd be playing with my action figures and I was doing voices of all the characters. So I do voices of like the villain where he'd be like, you cannot escape. And then like the kid being captured is like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And then the hero comes in, he says, I will save you. And so just doing all these crazy random voices. And what's funny is when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a voice actor. And
Yeah, you
so
should.
yeah, that might still be down the road, but time to time I'll pull out those voices for my kids and it cracks them up, or they'll say, Daddy, that's really weird. Don't do that. And so, but
But if it pays the bills, I love that. Well, that's you have a lot of talents. Very good. Very good. You like to tell stories and read stories. Why do you love stories so much? We'll be right back after this. You know, raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
Yeah, so I love stories because one, they're fun to tell, but two, stories is how we make sense of our world. You know, if you think about it, we always make sense of something through a story. So for example, take about, when I was sharing my story earlier, a lot of times people ask me how I got started with Awana, and what I do is I tell my story of how Awana had an impact on my life and where it's led me today. And so I use a story to make sense of my current situation. And we do that with everything. We do that with decisions we make. We'll say, oh, well, I made this decision because, and then we'll tell a story. Or, we do that with everything in life. We use stories to make sense of our world. And I think that's why they're so powerful and so important. And you can pick up on this through a lot of different things. I read something in a business magazine once that said, storytelling is at the core of culture. And I thought that was really good because, that's how we pass down our histories. It's how we make customs. The stories a group tells kind of determines what a culture values. I mean, you think of the culture right now, they have narratives and stories they're telling to help you develop what you should think is right or wrong, right? And so stories develop everything about us, even stories that aren't true. There was this author, I can't remember who it was, but she would say things like, all of our stories we make up, whether it's stories of heroes, monsters, journeys, they kind of give voice to this conquest we have for identity and purpose. And so, I think stories are powerful. And even if you think about it as Christians, everything about us is shaped by a story. We are a story-formed people because the word gospel just means good story. It's good news. And so we are shaped by a good news story, and we're called to proclaim a good news story as Christians. So, story, it's impossible to get away from it because it's how we make sense of the world, and it's what shapes who we are.
Yeah, I think it also connects us with other people. Like when someone shares a story and you kind of, we always try to relate ourselves to what that person is sharing. And like you said, it shapes the way we think, or it might help us to build a relationship or connect us. Talking about the gospel, I mean, what is it about the gospel that is so important about sharing it? We know we're supposed to, right? But it's kind of hard to share that story.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was talking about this with someone the other day of how we know the gospel is the most important story ever because it's a true story. It's a life-changing story. We're commanded to share it by Jesus. We know all these things, but we struggle to share it. And, there could be a lot of reasons of why we struggle to share the story. I think, if I had to boil it down to 3 reasons of why we struggle to share the gospel story, I think it comes down to 3 things. One is lack of practice. It just comes down to that. We easily talk about what we hear all the time, what we share all the time. We will naturally share those things. And so when it comes to the gospel, are we consistently hearing it? But not only that, are we practicing sharing it? I've heard a pastor put it this way, and it's so good. He says, think about learning a language. How do you get fluent in a language? You don't just randomly learn about, the verb tenses and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You become fluent in it just by practicing it, by getting in the culture and just sharing it.
Right.
And to become gospel fluent, as I've heard, you've got to get in the practice of just sharing it. So when you get in those reps of just sharing it over and over, when a time comes where you need to truly share it with someone, you can share it naturally.
Yeah.
So I encourage, families or children's ministries just provide space where you practice sharing it with one another, and maybe throw in questions that you could anticipate they hear. That way, that when they've practiced it in that safe environment, when they get into an environment where maybe an unbeliever is questioning them about something, it's more natural to share it. So I think it's lack of practice, because we get practice in hearing messages of the culture all the time. We hear it through media. We hear it on social media, the news. We hear it at school. We hear it everywhere. We get all these different messages. And because we're so used to hearing it and people talking, we get more in practice of other messages besides Jesus. Yeah. And so that's why I say you've got to combat that with practicing and hearing the gospel story compared to other false stories that you often hear.
I love the analogy of the language. I think sometimes practicing feels a little awkward, or it feels a little weird, but if we take the time, it's going to pay off. And so I love that analogy. That's so good. What are some other reasons that hold us back from sharing?
Yeah, I think also there's lack of clarity. And what I mean by this is, you take the story of the Bible, and the Bible's filled with a lot of stories. You got stories of Moses, stories of David, and sometimes we can see the stories in Scripture and think, man, these seem disconnected, or these seem random. What does David have to do with Moses, have to do with Jesus, have to do with me, right? And it can just feel confusing and disconnected. And what's beautiful about the gospel, when we get a clear understanding of the overarching story of the gospel, that meta story or that meta narrative makes sense of all stories. It actually brings clarity to them, so that no matter where you're at in the Bible, you can see how that story is fitting into the story of God's grand story of salvation. And so I think that it can help us bring clarity. And I think sometimes why sharing our faith can be difficult is, this has been my experience, and I think it's the experience of other people, is a lot of times you'll be in a gospel conversation with someone and you'll go down a ton of rabbit trails. Like, why does the Bible say this? Why does it do that? All this stuff. What about this story? That sounds odd. And we can get lost in those, but the gospel brings them clarity. I've had that happen multiple times, where someone will ask me, why is this story in Joshua here? What does this say about God? And it's like, well, this makes sense because of this part of the gospel. And what's beautiful about that is you can really use anything in like scriptural questions to bring it back to the gospel.
Yeah.
So I think lack of clarity, and when you get that clarity in the gospel story, it helps. And then the last thing I would say is lack of focus. Again, because conversations, you can't plan how they're going to go. Sometimes you can lose focus. And so what I think is really helpful is what I call having a gospel storyboard. And I got this image one time thinking about sharing the gospel. I think it was Walt Disney who came up with this concept of using storyboards. And if you've never seen a storyboard or used it, basically, if an animator or someone making a Disney movie like Pinocchio or something, if he's wanting to make sure everyone's on board with what he's saying, he wants to bring clarity and focus. So what he would do is, for a specific scene, he would draw a picture, then put it on the board and say, okay, here's kind of how I want this to look, and here's what's going to happen. Then when you get to the next scene, you draw a picture, put it on the board, say, okay, this is how I want this scene to look and what to happen. And what he's doing is he's bringing clarity and focus to both the characters and the plot, so that as the animators go to make the movie, they have a clear, focused idea of what that movie needs to look like. And in the same way, when we share the gospel, we just need to be clear and focused so that people know exactly what we're trying to communicate when we're sharing this grand narrative of Jesus.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's going to be so helpful for people that want to share the gospel, but they feel like they don't have all the answers. And I think that's another reason that holds people back. Like you were saying, they're nervous about, like, what if I don't know the answer to their question, or I don't even know that I fully know. So how can families grow in their knowledge, or grow in their comfortability? Is that a word?
Yeah.
Where they're more comfortable with sharing and being okay with not knowing all the answers.
Yeah. And one thing I want to encourage you, the Bible doesn't call us to know all the answers necessarily. We're called to know the answer, which is the gospel. And you're going to get all these other questions to the side. You'll get questions about the problem of evil or other things like that. How do you know the Bible's true? You'll get all those things. And one thing I encourage people is, you don't have to know all the answers, but what's beautiful in those moments, in those conversations, one, you can say, honestly, I don't know a specific answer to that, but I can research it, come back to you. Then that's okay to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think we put undue burden on us where we think, oh, if I can't answer a question that moment, I just made Christianity look dumb and now no one's going to believe it. That's
Yeah.
not true.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, God's the one who does the work. We're just the people he uses to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to tell someone you don't know, that's okay. Because guess what? There's so many things in life we don't know about, but we believe it anyway. So for example, ask the average person how gravity works. They can tell you gravity exists, but they couldn't tell you all the particularities of the science of why it exists. There's so many things like that in life where we don't know the full extent of it, but we still trust it. So like if you're a kid or an adult listening to this and there's a lot of questions you don't know, it's okay not to have all the answers in every specific moment. That's why we continue to grow as Christians. And one thing I love about evangelism is I think a lot of Christians get stunted in their growth as Christians because they don't evangelize, because they're not pushed to grow. Evangelism, because you'll be asked something you've never considered. And so it gives you an opportunity to go research it and grow in your faith. That's been my story. The times I have grown most in my faith was when I was challenged in it. When someone asked me a question I didn't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And two, another thing, you'll sometimes get questions where you kind of got to read the room a little bit, where this happened to me sometimes. So I lived in Chicago for a few years and I would do like street evangelism and things like that. And sometimes you would get a question and you could kind of tell they weren't really asking the question to want it to be answered. They just did it as like a smoke screen to distract you. So instead of answering the question, asking, why does that question matter to you? Is that question holding you back from believing in Jesus? Sometimes it's better to answer questions with questions.
Yeah, Jesus did that.
All the time.
All
because
the time.
What was Jesus doing? It wasn't because he didn't know the answer. He knew the answer. He did that to get to the heart of the question.
Right.
And I think that's more beneficial in those conversations, is to get to the heart of people's questions. I've seen that happen where they're asking a question, and when I just pressed them on the question a little more, they didn't even know why they were asking it. They're just like, oh, well, I've always heard this question asked, so I thought I'd ask it, and it didn't even matter to them.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's tied to a hurt, you know. Maybe they got hurt in a situation at a church or something. You just never know. So that's why in conversation, asking questions along the way, having a back and forth. I'm really big on gospel conversations where there's questions, there's back and forth, and there's this ability to say, I don't know that, and that's okay. I'm going to find out, because there's a lot of things the other person doesn't know either. So, yeah.
Getting back to the heart of it, though, why is it so important for us to share the gospel? You did say that it helps us with our own faith and growing, but what is the main purpose? Like, why are we supposed to share the gospel?
Yeah, we share it because two things. We're commanded to do it. You know, Mark 16:15 says, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, it says, go make disciples. You know, we have all these commands to share the gospel. That's why we're here, you know. Jesus empowers his church to go and proclaim this good news story. So we're commanded, but then too, it leads to the salvation of other people. You know, that's the means God has given us of how people come to Christ. It's by faith in Jesus alone. And they can only have faith in Jesus when they're told of him, when they're invited to believe in him. And so, yeah, it's a walk of obedience, but it's also this beautiful thing where God's inviting us into his story. You know, God doesn't need us to share the gospel. So it's a beautiful privilege that he's invited such fickle children like us to go and share his story with others. He's entrusted that with us. What a beautiful thing that he allows us to do that.
Yeah, that really is so amazing. And I think it's so good for kids to not wait. We say this on the podcast all the time, that kids don't have to wait until they're an adult to be used by God. They can be used by God right now. And so kids can share the gospel. And sometimes it's just by sharing your own story, sharing what has happened to you, what God has done for you, what you have learned, and then inviting that person to come with you to church or to come with you to Awana or whatever it is, so that they can learn more and grow in their faith. So I would encourage any kid listening, if this sounds a little scary to you, you don't have to have all the Bible answers. You just have to
Right.
share what God has done for you. And I think that's so important. What would you say, what are some things that families could do to get ready for sharing the gospel?
Yeah, one thing is resources that can help you get the practice in, both practicing hearing it and sharing it. And one thing I'm excited to talk about is Awana just had a resource launch not long ago called Talk About. And I know it's an interesting name and we get it from Deuteronomy 6, but the whole concept behind this resource is that we want to empower families to have faith conversations. And there's different series in this resource. And one of the first series is called God's Big Story. And it's teaching families how to share their faith and what the gospel story is. And so what I love about that resource is it's subscription based. So you only pay like $6 a month. And every week you're getting resources on questions, on activities, on Bible stories, all these things. And so I would encourage families to check that out. There's ways to get a free month of it so that you can see what that big story series looks like. But resources like Talk About. Another thing I do is say, just go for it. So for example, we recently did an event at my church where we were wanting kids to get in the practice of sharing the gospel. And we found this thing online where they could get chalk and through this drawing that they were doing with chalk could share the gospel. And just did it on the sidewalk at the park, you know? And so just simple things like that. Maybe going to your local park and handing out popsicles or something. And in doing that, saying, hey, we're doing this because we want to show the kindness of Jesus. Do you know who he is? It's easier to get those conversations going than I think we sometimes realize.
Yeah.
And like you said, just it could be simply inviting someone to church, and after they've come, following up saying, what did you think of that? What did you learn?
Yeah.
And so my two things would be get resources like Talk About by Awana that empower families to do that, but then also just go out and practice.
That's so good. And those are such great ideas. I think anybody could do that. Well, this has been so good, Hunter. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests to share a memory from when they were a kid. So do you have a memory you want to share with us?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I don't know why, the first memory that came to mind, when I think I was in middle school at the time, and we were setting up for a play, which, fun fact, I didn't share. You know how earlier I was talking about I like to do all those voices and things.
Mm-hmm.
I did acting competitions in middle and high school, and
Oh,
actually
wow.
placed nationally a couple of times. I don't get to share that a lot, but it's just kind of makes sense of why I have those random talents. But anyway, so we were setting up for, I think we were either practicing for a competition piece or we were getting ready for a play at the school. I can't remember, but our drama teacher sent us up to the attic to go get some props in the school. So we're up there, and the piece we needed was like far in a corner. So we're like walking over there, and all of a sudden my friend in front of me falls. But he didn't fall all the way through. This is the bad part. He fell halfway through and got stuck. So
Like in the floor?
So he's in the ceiling. So I wish I could like picture this, but so his legs are dangling from the ceiling and they're just running in place. So his top half is in the attic and then his bottom half is through the ceiling. So, and what's funny is it was in a classroom. So the part of the school where he was like halfway through in a classroom. And so I come out of the attic and I just see him squealing and I'm laughing so hard I'm struggling to go get help. And like finally we got the teacher up there to help us get him unstuck. But that always sticks with me. Like when I think of school memories, my buddy getting halfway stuck through this ceiling. And I still bug him about it to this day. Anytime I see him or call him, I'll say, hey, you remember that time you got stuck?
Hey, that could have been you. If you were first, you would have fallen through.
Oh, I know, but it wasn't me. So that's the best
That's
part.
So true. Well, this has been so good, Hunter. Hey, tell us a little bit about how we can find more about Awana and these resources you were talking about.
Yeah, so for Awana things in general, just simply go to awana.org. And there you can find out about resources, but also events we're doing. One event I would highlight for church leaders or parents to attend. Every September, we do this national event called the Child Discipleship Forum. And I went to it last year, and it was amazing. And so I would look into that. We cover everything from church to children to culture. And so if you want to look into that, you can go to childdiscipleshipforum.com. And tickets are on sale right now. There's a huge price break. I would really look into that. I was blessed by it last year, and I think you would have leaders and parents really blessed by it. And then just again to highlight the Talk About resource, I haven't been as excited for a resource from Awana in a long time because, one, I'm a parent who's going to get to use it myself.
Yeah.
But then, two, I feel like more and more parents are saying, hey, we need something to equip us at the home to have these spiritual conversations. And so if they want to look into that, they can go to talkaboutdiscipleship.com and they can look into it there. But out of all of them, I'd probably point your parents to look to that one the most because there's just a lot of good stuff in that resource.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Hunter, and thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't believe his friend fell through the ceiling. That's awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation with Hunter. I hope you did too. I love when he was sharing about stories, how they're so important. They help us relate to our world. It's how we pass down our history, our heritage. Stories develop things about us. We are a story-formed people. And he said the word gospel means the good news story, and that truly shapes who we are. He had such good encouragement about sharing the gospel and how that was so important in our faith walk and how it helped us in our faith. And he said we have to practice just like we would if we were learning a language. And I love when Hunter said that we don't have to know all the answers. It's okay to say we don't know, and we can go research it and come back, but we can always grow in our faith as we're learning. And God is the one who does the work. We are just the people that God uses. And I so love being reminded of that. God is the one who does the work. Well, if you would like more information about Awana, you can go to their website, awana.org. You can also find resources and information on Facebook and YouTube. And if you are interested in the resource that Hunter talked about today called Talk About, you could go to Talk About Discipleship and use the promo code HWilliams to get a discount and learn more about it. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. You know, I love it when my guests have kids because sometimes they get to be on the show with their parents. So here is Hunter's daughter, Margot, singing her favorite song.
Jesus loved me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Let the ones who him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me.
Oh my goodness, that was so good, Margot. Thank you so much for sharing. You have such a beautiful singing voice. And I promise I did not edit that. Her dad said she got a little distracted at the end, but wasn't that great? Well, if you would like to be on the podcast and share your favorite song or your favorite Bible verse, or maybe you have a joke that you like or quote that you want to share from a book or a movie, you are always welcome to send those to me. I love getting those. I would love to hear from you. You can find information about how to send that to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod. You can also go to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and find information there as well. Hey, if you'd like to support the podcast, I would really appreciate that. Here's a few ways you can do that. First, be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast, and always leave a rating and a review if you have not already. I love reading those, first of all. And when you do, it really does help boost the show so other people can find out about it and listen as well. You can also share this episode with friends and family and tell them why you and your family like to listen. Or you can go by my website and click the link that says Buy Me a Coffee. It doesn't really buy me a coffee. It's just a little bit of financial support. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. Well, I hope you guys are having an amazing week. I so appreciate that you keep listening. Oh, and just so you know, I take off the month of July, so that's coming up. So we have a couple of episodes left. They are so much fun. I cannot wait to share them with you. And then you can catch up on all your favorites while you guys are traveling or spending time at the pool or car rides. It's a great time to listen to a podcast. Well, in case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so very much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between, and all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.